full of whispers, alibis thin. Two sharp-eyed sleuths say, all right, who sinned? Has tipped low, clues fall in line. They read between the lines, right on time. Grim starts sweating when the squad rolls through. Every story tested, most don't stand up to prove. So grab your fedora, jump right in. True Crime Squad's on, and the trouble begins. Join the super squad, bonus laughs, deeper clues. Same sharp sleuths, just extra clues.
Hey everybody, welcome to the True Crime Squad. I'm Christy Brower, and will hopefully be joined shortly by my sister, co-host, and partner in crime, Katie Weaver. She'll be here in a minute. She's running late. She's got things happening in a kiln that she's, you know how she is with all of her crafty stuff. She's got to take care of something. So that's okay, because we sort of surprised you. This is about noon today when we slipped in a trial over on the Trials channel. Learned about this over the weekend and was kind of keeping an eye on it this morning to see what was happening with it, because they did jury selection today as well as started the trial. So I didn't know what for sure was going to happen. But this is the murder trial of Kevin Lychwick in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Let's see. Here's Kevin. This is Kevin, or as most people know him, Conrad. His legal name is Kevin. Apparently he prefers Conrad. So most of the witnesses that spoke about him, that like knew him from his community and stuff, knew him as Conrad, which I'm not sure if that's a middle name or, I'm not sure why it's a preferred name. But he is on trial for the murder of this man. This, sorry. Click too quick. This is Carlos Maldonado. Carlos went missing around right after the 14th of April in 2024. Carlos happened to be Kevin Lychwick's next door neighbor. And he was missing for 6 months. And he just vanished without a trace. One of those deals where, like, phone, wallet, keys, all of his personal belongings are in his apartment. He's never spoken to anybody. His debit card hasn't been used. Like, nothing has happened. To indicate any proof of life for 6 months. And then another neighbor who is also the apartment manager where Kevin and Carlos both live, discovered a body kind of up a hill behind the apartment complex where they all lived. And that body was Carlos, unfortunately. Carlos was wrapped in plastic and a tarp, and then he had all these sticks and stuff piled over his body. One of the interesting things about that we saw in the trial today is that there were piles of sticks like that in lots of places kind of along this hillside and garden area behind the apartment complex. And so it was kind of weird because the pile where the body was really looked like a lot of these other piles. You could kind of see why people may have walked past Carlos's remains for a long time. Sorry, I know someone complained about me yawning. I apologize. It's asthma. A lot of it, if I cough or yawn, it's asthma. And I'm just doing the best I can. My asthma's gotten worse, and that's what happens sometimes when I'm talking. So anyway, Carlos's body is found. It's mostly bones at this point. And unfortunately, the medical examiner discovers that Carlos has been shot twice. So this is a homicide. Not that I thought that he could have buried himself under the sticks on his own anyway. But this is most definitely a homicide. So let me give you a little bit of the background of this case, and then we'll get into what happened in court today. And I've got some videos for you for the from court today, the openers. So Kevin, who is 62, Carlos was 56 at the time that he died. Kevin, they started suspecting Kevin because of some strange behavior they saw on surveillance video. Things happening with him that seemed strange and probably were happening around the time that they think that Carlos went missing. His phone stopped having any activity on April 14th of 2024. So they were pretty sure that was the day that he died. Cough drop. It's going to help. Promise. So, let's see. So apartment surveillance footage, vehicle movement evidence, and other video from surrounding locations indicates that about the time that Carlos Maldonado went missing, Lychwick was up to some weird stuff. And they do believe that he was killed in the apartment complex and then his body moved to this hillside behind the apartment complex. And they do think that that happened with a vehicle. And there's some video that indicates that that was probably Lychwick's vehicle. So they get a search warrant for Lychwick's property, apartment and car. They find some guns. One of those guns eventually is matched to the murder weapon. Then they find some handwritten notebooks and notes, electronic evidence on his phone, and some personal records and documents. They find are what they call the Operation Slop Shop documents. This is written plans for various operations for threats that are to be neutralized. First name on that list, Carlos Maldonado. The documents included names, addresses, phone numbers, social media information, and personal details regarding multiple individuals. One document also states, threats from the first op have been neutralized. Yeah. Probably about Carlos. So investigators get pretty concerned about this dude and thinking, he's probably not a super safe guy. So they arrest him. Because they're worried that he may, it's been 6 months since Carlos went missing. They're worried at this point that he might be working on whose name is number 2. And, anybody else on that list was at risk. So they arrested him. And those concerns were brought up at bail proceedings, and he was held without bond so that they can kind of do some investigating where they know he's safely behind bars and can't hurt anybody. So they do recover a firearm that they believe is Lychwick's, and ballistics that were the bullets that were recovered from Maldonado's remains are said to match the bullets in Lychwick's firearm. Now, that hasn't been presented at trial yet, so that's an allegation, but it's coming up. That's coming up quick at trial. Obviously, this is a really strong piece of physical evidence linking Lychwick to the murder. So, Carlos's remains were found on Halloween of 2024, so October 31st of 2024. And before Lychwick was arrested, a reporter named Rebecca Clough interviewed Lychwick just in the neighborhood after the discovery of the remains. Lychwick was just real nonchalant about the whole thing. He said he was surprised about this discovery. He said it was a bizarre situation. And he said the neighborhood was really quiet. He actually said the neighborhood was dead. And then he said, oh, no offense. It was real weird. I'm not sharing it because I think it would be a copyright violation, and so I got to be careful with that. But he kind of talked about how they live near the river, like somehow that had a meaning, and also that it was just a very quiet neighborhood. It's pretty interesting, though, that he would be willing to talk to the press on camera after the body that he squirreled away had been found. But when you meet him on video today, I think you won't be surprised by that. So in December of 2024, criminal charges are filed. This is when he's arrested. He's charged with first-degree intentional homicide because they say that the Slop Shop list basically proves premeditation. He's also charged with hiding a corpse. So the state says the murder was intentional, the body was concealed to avoid detection, and the writings demonstrated planning and premeditation. So they seek a really high bail. I mean, I guess he did get bail, but it was $5 million. And he couldn't pay it. Who could, right? He pleads not guilty. Eventually, probable cause is found by the courts. It's bound over for trial. So this case was coming up for trial last week. It's been delayed several times. And the judge is getting real frustrated with the delays. And then on June 2nd of this year, 2026, in court, Lychwick wants to fire his public defender. He doesn't like him. He doesn't think he's representing him. He doesn't think that he's going to do the defense that Lychwick wants. And he needs more time, Your Honor, because he needs to find a new attorney. And the judge, at this point, has had enough of this shit, frankly. And so he gives Lychwick two choices. You either tough it out with your current public defender, or you fire your public defender and go pro se, and you're going to trial on June 8th, as scheduled. And Lychwick chose pro se for reasons only he will ever understand. When you see him in court, you'll see. He really thought that Judge Mass was going to give him more time. And boy, the judge just said, not on my watch, asshole. We're going to jail. We're going to jail. No, you're going to trial. So they did jury selection this morning. And then they began the trial. We streamed 4 hours of the openers and first day witnesses. We'll get to that here in a minute. It's pretty interesting because he's just by himself at the defense table. It's something. It's something. So now that you kind of know the background of the case, let's watch a little bit. Let's start with the prosecution's opener. This is just a clip. It's about 18 minutes, but it gives you a pretty good feel of what their case is against Lychwick.
You may give your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Madam Court Reporter, can I, or Madam Clerk rather, can I please have the TVs on so I can project the PowerPoint? Thank you. Thank you very much. May it please the court, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is why we're all gathered here today in this courtroom, for Carlos, to figure out what happened to Carlos, because the evidence is going to show that on April 14th, 2024, this defendant, Kevin Lychwick, murdered him. He shot him twice, once in the torso and once in the center of Carlos's face. This is a picture of Carlos. This was a much better day for him than April 14th, 2024. And I think it's important before we talk about the facts of this case to give you a little bit of information about who Carlos was as an individual in life before we talk about what tragically happened to him. Carlos lived in an apartment at 1512 East North Street here in Waukesha. It's actually just a stone's throw away from this courthouse. It's just down the hill. Some of you may have even driven past this apartment complex when you came to court a little bit earlier this morning. Carlos was just 55 years old on the day that he was murdered. He had goals in life. He was planning to start his own business, and he was very, very close with his daughter, Talisa. In fact, him and Talisa enjoyed going to different restaurants together. They enjoyed going to different Mexican restaurants. They enjoyed trying chips and salsa from every single Mexican restaurant that they went to, and that's how they would determine whether a restaurant was a good one or not. The relationship between Carlos and his daughter had never been better at the time of this incident, before he was tragically taken in this case. April 14th, 2024 is the day that the evidence in this case is going to show when this homicide took place. What you're going to hear is that on that particular morning, the evidence will show that Carlos got up that morning and went to a hardware store where he made a purchase. We know this because there was surveillance footage that captured him at this particular hardware store. We also know from his bank statements that he made a purchase on April 14th, 2024. We also know that from after he finished his transaction at the hardware store, he returned to his apartment. And we know this because there was an apartment manager. Her name is Glenda Rose, and you're going to hear from her very early on in this case. She'll be one of our first witnesses. She actually witnessed Carlos in the garage area of the apartment complex cutting wood, and she actually greeted him. So we know that he made it back from the hardware store to the apartment complex where he lived. Unfortunately, after Glenda saw Carlos in the garage area, Carlos was never seen alive again. And despite many family members, including Talisa, his daughter, trying to figure out where he was, nobody heard from him. Talisa actually reported him missing, because it was out of character for Carlos to actually not contact his daughter. This was something that whenever Talisa called Carlos, at this point, Carlos was always very prompt in terms of getting back to her. So the fact that she had attempted to call her father and he hadn't gotten back to her, that was very suspicious. So there was a period of time in which several months, nobody knew where Carlos was. Nobody had heard from him. We were trying to find him. And October 30th, 2024 is when we made a very startling discovery. What happened on that day and what the evidence will show is that there was a gentleman named Nathan Poley. Mr. Poley is a resident at 1512 East North Street, the same apartment complex that both Carlos and Mr. Lychwick lived at the time of this murder. And Mr. Poley was also a maintenance worker at that particular complex as well. And so what Mr. Poley was doing on this particular day was he was doing some yard work in the wooded area behind this particular apartment complex. So to give you a little bit of a sense of what this complex is like, this is a 2-level complex. There's units on the ground floor, and then there's a second level, and then there's additional apartment units on the second level. And then bordered to the back of that complex is a giant hill with some woods in the back area. So Mr. Poley was in this wooded area. He was doing some yard work, and he came across this blue tarp that you see depicted in this photo. And at first, Mr. Poley didn't think anything of this blue tarp. He thought it was just something that somebody had thrown away. But as he got a little bit closer to it, he made a shocking discovery. Underneath the tarp was Carlos's remains. And the tarp was covered, you're going to hear, in sticks, branches, and other foliage, almost as if the person who had set it there did so intentionally in order to hide what was under that blue tarp. The police get called because Mr. Poley reports what he found to the apartment manager, and the police are called, and the police respond to the scene. And ultimately, Carlos is determined to be the individual whose remains were found under that tarp because dental records were able to positively identify him as such. His autopsy was performed on November 1st. There's going to be a medical examiner that's going to testify in this case for you as well. The medical examiner is going to tell you that she found trauma-associated whale that was located attached to Carlos's scalp. There were entrance and exit wounds, and that there was a second projectile that was found under Carlos's torso area as well, and that he had an injury to his lower vertebrae that was consistent with a gunshot wound as well. Given the length of time that Carlos was missing from April to October, his body was in a very severely decomposed state. And unfortunately, we'll have to show you some pictures of that, but that's what happened in this case as well. So now we have this homicide. We have this body in the woods, and the Waukesha police are now involved, and they're investigating this. And they're at a disadvantage, is what you're going to hear, because of the length of time between when Carlos disappears and when he's ultimately discovered. So the police are really behind the eight ball here. They have to hustle to really uncover evidence and follow leads and make sure that they're identifying the person who's responsible for this. They start to investigate. They interview several people at the apartment complex. They canvass the area. And to be frank with you, for a while there, wasn't looking very good. They were having some difficulty figuring out who did this, what were the circumstances surrounding this. They knew it was a homicide, but they didn't know who actually was responsible for this. And then what you're going to hear is they caught a huge break. And the break came in the form of a gentleman named Anthony the Freebre. And for the court reporter, that's spelled Lefebvre. Anthony, you're going to hear, was a resident at this particular apartment complex as well. And Anthony had a trail camera. And Anthony had been given permission by the apartment complex to build a garden in the wooded hill area behind the complex. And in order to keep tabs on this garden that he was building and to show the progress with family members, Anthony also set up a trail camera with the apartment complex's permission. And the footage on the camera dated all the way back to April 29th, 2024. So just a couple of weeks after Carlos went missing, and the evidence will show he was murdered on that particular day. The police came out and they saw the trail camera. And then they said, hey, we'd like to take a look at that footage just to see if there's anybody on that camera. And Anthony was very cooperative. He gave the police the footage, as you're going to hear, and the investigators reviewed it. And what they found on that trail camera was the defendant, Mr. Lychwick, walking around the area where Carlos's remains were found at very odd hours of the night. They saw the defendant carrying a white trash bag. They saw him suspiciously looking in windows of the apartment complex as if he was looking to see if somebody was watching what he was doing. He was seen in one clip, and you're going to see this as well as part of the state's presentation of evidence. He was wearing boots. At one point, he was kicking an item off his boots after he was seen walking in the area where Carlos's body was ultimately discovered. And he also was carrying some sort of tool. We don't exactly know what tool it was because of the quality of the video footage, but he's definitely carrying a tool as well. So the police now start to look into Mr. Lychwick because, this is suspicious, right? And we're trying to see if this is the individual who's responsible for murdering Carlos. And once they start to look into Mr. Lychwick, they make many shocking and incriminating discoveries based on the evidence. So what Detective Stern and I did last week in preparation for this case is we sat down and we highlighted together, we came up with a list of what we think are going to be the most compelling pieces of evidence that you're going to hear. It's not all the evidence that you're going to hear in this case, but this is what we believe are the most compelling pieces of evidence that you're going to hear that point towards Mr. Lychwick's guilt in this case. First piece of evidence that the police found in this case was a note. The police went and got a warrant. They got a search warrant to search Mr. Lychwick's apartment to either confirm or dispel their suspicions that he may have been involved in this homicide. What they found, and you'll hear more about this during the state's presentation of testimony, was several documents that were handwritten with several quote-unquote operations listed on them. One of these pieces of paper, and you see it depicted here on this photo as well, contained information about an operation named Operation Slop Shop. You'll see it at the top of this exhibit as well. Specifically, as it relates to Operation Slop Shop, the piece of paper that was found in the defendant's apartment, where, by the way, he lives alone, he does not have a roommate, specifically names Carlos as a, quote, threat. There was an additional piece of paper as well describing another operation. This particular piece of paper indicated that Operation Slop Shop had been completed and that the threats from that first stop had been, quote, neutralized. There were additional pieces of paper as well found in the defendant, Mr. Lychwick's apartment as well. There were several other operations listed with many other individuals. The important piece is that those individuals you're going to hear had connections to Mr. Lychwick. So if the idea is that he didn't write the note, well, you're going to hear that several of the individuals listed on these notes, again, were connected to him. And then when the police were serving the warrant on Mr. Lychwick at Mr. Lychwick's apartment as well, you don't always get Perry Mason moments, in the middle of trial. But this case, we actually have one of them. Because when the police were serving the warrant, Mr. Lychwick was given a copy of the search warrant for his particular apartment, a courtesy copy, if you will. What we do in Waukesha County is we try not to include victims' names in court documents because they have a right to privacy. We want to make sure that we're not unknowingly exposing their name or their information to the public for their own protection. So the search warrant that was given to Mr. Lychwick only said victim A. That's all it said, victim A. Yet, you're going to hear that when Mr. Lychwick was given a copy of that warrant and he looked at it, he exclaimed, quote, "Carlos Maldonado, I had nothing to do with that." At that point, we had not made public the fact that Mr. Maldonado's body was the individual that we had located on the grounds of 1512 East North Street. The evidence is going to show that only the killer would have known that Mr. Maldonado was the individual who was on that grounds when Mr. Lychwick made that statement. Another compelling piece of information that we found in this case was a storage unit. Now, during this investigation, the police looked into a bunch of different things as it relates to the defendant. We looked at his purchase history. We looked at how he was spending his money to see if there was anything that was suspicious as well from an investigative standpoint. Mr. Lychwick was on a pretty tight budget. This is what we found from looking at his banking records. He was living on SSI. Yet, the evidence is going to show that on November 1st, 2024, just 3 days after we discovered Carlos's remains at the apartment complex. Remember, he was found on October 30th. So just 3 days later, what we found is that the defendant drove all the way up to the Fox Cities area. He drove to the Kimberly area, and he took advantage of a 1-month free promotion to rent a storage unit in Kimberly, Wisconsin. We know that on November 1st, from what we found in his phone, that he was spending hours searching for storage units here in Waukesha County. We know, as I stated, he was on a tight budget. He was budgeting about $50 for gas. This trip, round trip to go from Kimberly back to Waukesha County would have greatly blown through his gas budget. Yet, we know that he went all the way to Kimberly, and you're going to hear from the representatives from the U-Haul as well, and he rented that storage unit. But he didn't rent it for very long, because 1 month later, after the free month had expired, and you're going to hear evidence to this effect as well, the defendant is seen on surveillance footage going back to the U-Haul storage facility and closing out that U-Haul unit that he had rented. Again, you're going to hear from an employee who helped him with that process. You're going to hear that the defendant was in a rush. He wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. And he cleared out the entirety of that storage unit as well. And then he made his way back to Waukesha County. What he didn't know at that time was that the police had obtained a GPS warrant for his car. So when he left Waukesha County and traveled to the Fox Cities, the police were following him. They wanted to see what he was up to. And so what they ultimately did was they effectuated a stop, and then they seized the vehicle that he was driving as well from Outagamie County all the way back to Waukesha County. And then they found the holy grail of evidence. The evidence is going to show in the defendant's vehicle. They found in the trunk of his vehicle, after they went and got a search warrant, by the way. So they seized the vehicle, but the police then went and got a search warrant. They searched the trunk of his vehicle, and they found, and you see it depicted here at the bottom of this picture as well, a 1939 Luger firearm. And the police did 2 things with this particular firearm. They're going to be very, very important in this case. The first thing they did is they packaged up this firearm, and then they mailed it to the state crime lab, in Milwaukee. And there's an individual who works at the crime lab by the name of Jessica Crawford. She's a firearms and markings expert is her title. And so what she did, and you're going to hear from her as well throughout this case about her process as well, you're going to hear that Ms. Crawford tested this firearm and found, despite it being a very old firearm, that it was fully functional. It was working just fine. It was capable of recycling rounds through and firing bullets. But the other thing, and this is perhaps even more important than the fact that the Luger was fully functional, Ms. Crawford took 2 projectiles that we recovered from Carlos. The one that came out of his head from the autopsy, and then the one that was found under him in the tarp where his body was discovered at the apartment complex. She had both of those projectiles. And then she had, in addition, her own library of ammunition that she had in the lab as well. So she test fired the rounds that she had from her library of ammunition, and then she compared those rounds with the 2 projectiles that we know went through Carlos. And what she found and what she's going to testify to is that both projectiles bear markings that are similar. And when a gun is recycled through a firearm, through the barrel of a firearm, it leaves certain markings so that you know that it came from that particular firearm. Never has it happened in the history of firearms that a bullet has bared the same markings, and she will tell you this, that came from 2 separate guns. So the bullets that we pulled out of Carlos came from the weapon that we found in the defendant's trunk of his car. But we're not done, because not only did the police send the gun for testing, they also swabbed the gun for DNA. And they sent the DNA swabs that they tested. And they also had Mr. Lychwick's DNA as well. That was obtained pursuant to a buccal swab as well. They sent that to the lab as well. And what they found, there was a DNA expert that actually tested this as well. And each person has their own DNA profile, right? The only exception to that is if you have an identical twin, which is not true in this case. Mr. Lychwick's DNA profile was found on that murder weapon that was in his truck, or it was in his vehicle, excuse me. And what you're going to hear is that it was a single source DNA profile, not a mixture where multiple people are contributing to this profile, but a single source DNA profile.
All right. So, as you can tell, lots and lots of evidence against Lychwick. Now, I will say, I think it's really unfortunate that the prosecutor keeps saying the victim's last name wrong. It is not Maldonado, it is Maldonado. I double checked because I thought, geez, do I have it wrong? No, he does, which is really screwed up. But anyway, they have a lot of evidence against Lychwick. He, the Operation Slop Shop hit list with Carlos's name at the top, saying that, the threat has been neutralized in the first op. Yeah. And then the gun. The gun matches. It's got his DNA on it. There's a lot. Plus just video of him out there doing weird shit on the trail cam, on other surveillance videos, doing things that indicate that he was out there at the time that Carlos's body had to have been placed there. There's a lot. So that's a lot of what the prosecution has. It's not all of it, but it's quite a bit. I've got a couple of clips for you from Lychwick's opening. It's crazy. It's all over the place. There are a lot of objections because he just keeps saying stuff he's not supposed to say. Partially because he doesn't know what the hell he's doing, and partially because he's just a real belligerent guy. So let's watch a couple of these clips I've got for us.
To give an opening statement at this time.
Yes, I would.
All right, you may proceed.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, quite simply, I am not guilty of this crime. I feel sorry for my poor neighbor, but I did not know him well enough to have any animus against him even, and I have never killed anyone in my life. The largest warm-blooded animal that I've ever killed was a skunk that walked in front of my car by accident years ago. I am not a killer. The police in this matter have a largely circumstantial case. I don't know how exactly they circumvene on me, but I simply did not do this. I am unprepared for this trial. I am in poor health. I was in poor health and doctoring at the time that they arrested me, and they knew that. The police have.
Sorry for the sound effects. That was unintentional. That's been added by a program I use just to make these clips. So AI is adding laugh track and cheering in. So sorry about that.
Made gross exaggerations in their reports, and I do not recognize that firearm. This is the first time I am seeing a picture of the firearm used in this murder, and I do not recognize it. That was not in the trunk of my car when they stopped me. They did not have a warrant when they stopped me.
Objection.
The objection is overruled at this time. The warrant was discussed in the state's opening. Mr. Lychwick, though, I will remind you that you're venturing a little into argumentative territory. So I want you to just focus on what you believe the evidence will show, and you can infer arguments in your closing arguments, okay?
All right.
Go ahead.
I caught some gross exaggerations immediately with the prosecution's opening statement here. They're telling you that Detective Stern had presented me with a copy of the search warrant, which he did when they went and destroyed my apartment. And in the search warrant, Mr. Carlos's name was on the search warrant. And I knew everyone in our building there, down at the bottom of the hill here, knew that Mr. Carlos was being looked for, that he was missing. Detective Pavlik of the Waukesha Police Department took an initial statement from me the night that they were examining the crime scene. When I was returning from the social engagement, I gave my statement to him, and he asked me if I had seen Mr. Carlos around anywhere recently, and I told him, of course, that I had not. This is a gross exaggeration. I don't know how the detective can wear his badge with honor and blow something like this out of proportion and use this as an excuse to center on me in this affair. I was never walking around in the area where the poor man was found. I was never in that area. And yet the state is telling you that I was walking in the area where the poor man was found. I was not. I was never in that area. Quite the contrary. The man who discovered the body and was an initial suspect of this crime, Mr. Polly, who is now missing.
Objection. Relevance.
Mr. Lychwick, I'm going to sustain that objection. I'm not sure how the testimony is going to come out regarding that, but I think that's something that's outside the scope of this trial. So I want you to focus on the evidence that will be shown in this trial. You may proceed.
I would like to say that Mr. Polly was the one who was.
Objection.
I don't know what his next statement's going to be. What were you going to say, Mr. Lychwick? You want to say that Mr. Polly is...
Mr. Polly, a very suspicious character in this building to begin with, was seen quite frequently in the area where the poor man was found, where the remains were found.
I object.
Poor man.
Hang on one moment. Attorney Tombasco, are you objecting to that statement?
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Because it's contrary to this court's pretrial rulings regarding Denny evidence.
Mr. Lychwick, I'm sustaining that objection. At this point, I want you to focus on the state's opening, your opening, the evidence that you believe will be presented. And I'm reminding you of the scope of some of my pretrial rulings about what can come in and what cannot come in.
He's talking about another neighbor he's just randomly accusing of this crime. The prosecutor has had enough of this bullshit. Okay. That's, anyway, so that gives you a pretty good idea. I have another video too. Katie, you'll probably laugh because I forgot to check my AI created videos for some sound effects, and AI has added some laugh track, which is really quite something.
Oh, shit.
But that's basically, Lychwick is like, it's Lychwick, but his name gets said a bunch of different ways. I'm trying to say it correctly. I'm also saying the victim's name, Maldonado, not Maldonaro.
Oh.
Prosecutor, for the
Oh
love.
dear.
Like,
Oh.
is the neighbor also on the list? We've not seen the list, so we don't know who's on the list. But there were
He's just
concerns when
throwing
they
out
arrested him.
random. Oh
Oh
dear.
yeah, and he's making a lot of allegations. So here is another clip with more of said allegations.
They have me saying, sure, the words coming out of my mouth were not those that I actually stated that night, which is tampering with the evidence, which is fraud. I was made to say, as you'll see on their version of the body camera footage, oh, definitely, I agree with you. You know, have a good night and all this kind of stuff. That was
So he's talking about the body cam footage of the police when they were, searching his apartment and deciding to arrest him and taking his vehicle and all that stuff. And he's now alleging, and this is where he and his attorney parted ways on June 2nd. He is alleging that they have modified the body cam footage to make him say things he didn't say. That's what he's saying. And apparently his public defender was like, yeah, no, we are not going to be saying that in court. There is no evidence. What are you talking about? This body cam has already been verified. And like, no, that's, and Lychwick just wants it to be tampering because he says that's not what he said, even though he is on video saying that.
Yeah.
That's where he and the attorney parted ways, and that is why he is representing himself pro se at this point.
Oh boy, that says a
So,
lot. That says a lot. When he said that, all I could hear
oh,
was that phrase. Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
yes, exactly. So here's a little more on what he's alleging there.
that was not in the original Axon body camera footage filmed that night by the two police officers. That is tampering with evidence. I have tried to bring that before the court. I wanted to. I have the chain of custody of that evidence here, which shows considerable attention to Officer C.D. Baca's Axion body camera footage and Officer Tyndall's body camera footage. I can show that according to the jargon used with digital technology now, they call the data acquired by the filming and the audio portion of any body camera footage. And indeed, many of the footage that we ourselves are prone to photographing when we use our cell phones and everything is called checksum data. And in the evidence that I have in my disposal, which was presented to me on discovery by the prosecution and the police, I'm assuming they didn't think that me and my defense would come across this, but I did, and it clearly shows that they have changed this checksum data at least twice on C.D. Baca's body camera footage. Again, I strongly urge the jury to consider the tampering of evidence in this case. This case should have been dismissed at least 8 months ago when I discovered this evidence, which was given to me late by my first state public defender attorney, who was grossly inadequate and not providing me the correct defense that I needed, and I was forced to terminate him as my public defender. I emphatically deny any involvement in this crime. I am a law-abiding citizen. I am a good Christian of the Lutheran faith. I am a responsible citizen. I am an ex-police officer myself. I served as a security police officer in the United States Air Force. If this trial proceeds in a manner which should deny me the justice that, in large part, I am really not qualified to oversee, as I am not a trained attorney, this will be a travesty of justice. I ask you to please consider the fact that a serious wrong is being perpetrated here. It will serve nobody if the state and the police, the several police officers of the many good police officers in the Waukesha Police Department have their way here. For one thing, the victim and his family will not receive justice, and they should definitely receive justice. The killer or killers, in my personal opinion, I think more than one person was involved in this homicide.
Objection.
Mr. Lychwick, consistent with the court's pretrial rulings on Denny evidence, the court will sustain that objection. It's also, well, the court will sustain the objection. Anything else, Mr. Lychwick?
Well, yes, Your Honor. Is that Denny evidence?
Yes.
And I must ask you to consider the fact that a person is considered innocent until proven guilty in this country. And I certainly am not guilty of this crime. And if a travesty of justice is allowed to take place at the culmination of this trial, the perpetrators of this crime will be allowed to roam free and perhaps kill again. You should consider that. The police should be put on the track of whoever did this to this man again, because while I'm in custody here, the state is under the false impression that they have their man, if you will, and they're not looking for the killer anymore. That is a serious miscarriage of justice in itself. That is a serious safety issue for public at large. I ask you to please weigh that in here as well.
So it was just a whole lot of that out of Lychwick. A lot of travesty of justice. That's been coming out several times throughout the day. One of the things he brought up is that he is in custody, and he was saying that in front of the jury. And after they finished the opening statements and they sent the jury out, the judge was like, Mr. Lychwick, we have worked really hard to not show the jury evidence that you are in custody, which I think is why no one is standing when they speak. I think he's shackled, so they have to all sit. And then you saying that to them may give them the wrong impression. And oh boy, we lost Katie. I don't know where she went. He felt that that's a part of his defense, that he can't really adequately defend himself because he's in jail. And the judge was like, that is absolutely not the case, and you cannot say that to the jury. Like, that's not anything to do with the actual evidence to be presented in front of the jury. So he's trying to garner a lot of sympathy, I think, more than anything. Sorry, Katie's internet crashed. She said she just is apparently not supposed to be here tonight. I don't know. Did you hear Chains Riley? Yeah, that was some stuff that AI added. Sorry, I usually check and make sure there aren't any sound effects in these, and I didn't have a chance tonight. So anyway, it's a lot of that. He's being picked on. They modified the body cam footage to make him say stuff he didn't say. He was never walking around out there where Carlos's body was hidden, even though he's on trail cam footage. Like, Carlos who? I barely even know that guy. What? Who? Carlos what? Even though he knew immediately it was Carlos when they came to him. And he, of course, the Operation Slop Shop documents, like, he can't really say that he doesn't know who Carlos Maldonado is, but he's trying to say that. So anyway, it was a lot of that. It was a lot of word salad. The dude is, well, he's difficult. He's real caring about things that don't matter at all. Unfortunately, he doesn't seem to be able to tell the difference between what is actually important and what isn't. He had a real argument with the their property manager about where the body was found, because he was sure it was down by the driveway, and no, it was halfway up the hill, and it was still found right there behind your apartment complex there, Lychwick. That's how it is. So We got through the opening statements. And then we got through, I would say, a lot of witnesses. The state's case is going quickly, mostly because Lychwick does not, he's not doing much cross-examination. And what he is doing is really pointless. So the first witness is Glenda Rose, and she is the apartment manager. She is the one that the guy found the body and then came and got her, and she saw the body and she called the police. And anyway, she testified kind of about the apartment complex layout and, you know, the whole property layout. Also, she saw Maldonado on April 14th, indicating the last time anybody actually saw him. And then just kind of verified a lot of the physical, like, location evidence of the apartments where the body was found, that kind of thing. Then we got hang on one second. Sorry, my notes jumped. She was pretty interesting. It was also interesting because when she was cross-examined, he kept calling her Glenda, which seemed weird. But, I mean, he knows her. So then we had one of the witnesses that we had is Talisa, who is Carlos's daughter, and that was really sad. She was there representing him. She asked to not be on camera, and so we heard her testimony, but we did not see her. She's pretty young, I'd say in her 20s. Had kind of had a rocky relationship with her dad when she was younger, and then they'd kind of healed their relationship and were close. And she talked a lot about how much he loved her and about how much he supported everything that she did and how he wanted her to go back to college because she was so smart, and like just talked about what a wonderful dad he was to her around the end of his life, and just how sad this was for her. She's talked about how she knew he was dead because, I mean, he just disappeared one day and she never heard from him again. And she said he would never have done that. They were in very regular contact and he would never have just blown her off. I was really sad. And then we got several police officers and forensics people talking about when they found the body, where the body was. There were pictures of Carlos's remains, although we didn't get to see those. Those weren't shown. We did get to see a lot of the pictures, just not those. Sorry. New cough drop. The asthma is striking again. And then we got a botanist in for some of the plant material that was found around Carlos's remains. I don't know why that mattered. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I don't know what that had to do with anything, really. And then we had a couple of detectives on that were the detectives that were doing the investigation and that were searching his apartment and that kind of thing. And that's where we got to by the end of the day. One of the things that they did when they were investigating Lychwick is they looked at his spending history. That they found a lot of receipts in his apartment, and that they found that around the time that Carlos had died, he was buying a lot of black trash bags, guys. He bought 5 pounds of salt, and they thought that was weird because he lives alone. And just some stuff that was kind of just implying nefarious behavior that any decent defense attorney would have objected to totally. I mean, they're getting away with a lot. He did question her, though, Lychwick did, about that. It was the one thing he did today that made any sense at all, which he was like, how do you know what I'm doing with those garbage bags? And also, how do you know I live alone? And she said, because you told me when I interviewed you at the police department. And he said, well, I do have a love life. He wanted to make it very, very clear that he had girlfriends and that sometimes those girlfriends were in his apartment. So maybe he needed more salt, black trash bags. I don't know. It was pretty funny, but he did push back on her that these are just your opinions. Like, how do you know what I did with the salt or whatever? Because they didn't find the salt in his house. Anyway, that was kind of interesting. Partway through, he'd let a couple of witnesses go without questioning them. And then they took a break. They took a lunch break. When they came back, he goes, Your Honor, I'd like to recall this witness and this witness. And the judge is like, the judge kind of spluttered, I think because he was just sort of stunned. He's like, recall? He said, you were given the opportunity to cross-examine both of them and you opted not to. Also, this is not your case in chief. You can't call any witnesses. What are you talking about? Which was pretty funny. And then, like, the very next witness was one of the detectives working on the case. And the prosecutor finished with him. And Lychwick didn't ask him any questions. And then as he is starting to leave the stand, she says, oh, wait a minute, I forgot a question, Your Honor. Can I recall him? And the judge let her recall him for the question. And, you know, anyway, then Lychwick was pissed and wanted to know why the judge let her do that and not him. Because he doesn't understand the difference between the prosecution's witnesses and his witnesses, and when it's his turn to be case in chief and when it isn't. And anyway, I'm sure it's just adding to the conspiracy theories that are building in his brain. It was pretty funny. At this point, I mean, he really hasn't made any points that matter at all. The prosecution has already brought forward a ton of their evidence. Not all. We haven't seen DNA, we haven't seen ballistics, and we haven't seen the medical examiner. Those are some of the main ones that I imagine are probably tomorrow. This trial is scheduled to run for a week. Seems unlikely that it will take that long, as quickly as the prosecution is getting through their witnesses. And I can't imagine what Lychwick will actually be able to present as defense, because you know what's going to happen. We've seen this before. He's just going to try to call whoever he wants, but have those folks been subpoenaed by him? And he may not even know, because he, you know, fired his attorney 6 days ago and opted to do this on his own, even though he really has no idea what the hell he's doing. So that should be interesting. But I do expect tomorrow that we're likely to see medical examiner. We're likely to see ballistics expert, DNA expert, you know, all of the testing that was done on the gun. I'm hoping we're going to get to actually see some of the operation Slop Shop and, you know, all the other stuff, the writings that he's done. I'm curious to see how he's going to try to minimize those, considering that number one on that op was Carlos Maldonado. It's pretty tough to beat at this point, honestly. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Maybe he'll perk up tomorrow. I don't know. Watching a pro se trial is always a pretty interesting time, and this is definitely one of those times. So come join me over on the Trials channel. We will be live on Tuesday at 9 a.m. Mountain. They will be starting a little earlier than that, which is kind of nice because it means that we're running behind, which means that we can fast forward through the breaks. I like doing it that way. Also, I don't want to start work at 7 o'clock in the morning because I hate that. So come join us, 9 a.m. Mountain. Go come see what this case is all about. And what it really is all about is that Carlos Maldonado lost his life and that his sweet daughter lost her dad. And that's what we want to keep our focus on. And remember that this is about justice for him. So thank you for joining me. We'll also be back live tomorrow at 3 p.m. Mountain with our regular Tuesday show and all of our other regularly scheduled content this week, as well as this trial for as long as it takes. So You know it. We are the True Crime Squad. Thanks for being here.
Join the super squad, bonus laughs, deeper clues, same sharp sleuths, just extra clues.